Good day, everyone. Today at the kitchen table, I'm joined by Seriah Azkath. Seriah is a longtime radio broadcaster, and he's also the creator and host of Where Did the Road Go? Where Did the Road Go is a weekly radio show and podcast that focuses on the paranormal, ancient civilizations, the occult, and other fringe topics. Where Did the Road Go addresses all of these topics, though, with a skepticism that doesn't devolve into a cynical debunking, and with an open-mindedness that won't let your brain fall out. So you can tune into Where Did the Road Go every Saturday on Real Life Radio on WVBR 93.5 FM in Ithaca, New York, or you can catch it weekly on the Where Did the Road Go YouTube channel, where you'll find additional shows and content as well. Also, check out wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you'll find show archives, a blog, an excellent reading list, and a whole bunch more. And of course, you can also find Where Did the Road Go in the usual places on Facebook and Twitter. And if you're interested in these subjects, you should absolutely head over to Where Did the Road Go on Patreon and sign up for extra content. And without further ado, here is Seriah. All right. Thank you very much, Seriah. Welcome to the kitchen table. Very glad
to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you, man. So I figured it would be good to start out just with a bit of background, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Where Did the Road Go, how the channel started off, and what led you to want to create it.
I've been doing radio since 1994, because I have a music show, a metal show called The Last Exit for the Lost. I don't like to call it a metal show because we do play other stuff too, but it's metal at its core. And so I never really thought podcast. I never liked talk radio to begin with. And what happened basically is I got really into Graham Hancock and found him totally just, I would leave the TV on while I was doing stuff, but I would mute it. And a friend of mine had got me leaving the captions on because he made a good point that, even if it's in English, sometimes captions help. And I thought, well, that's true. And then I kind of got used to doing that, and I muted it. And one of the Graham Hancock specials came on, and I'm seeing pyramids and stuff. I'm like, oh, cool pyramids. And I'm seeing stuff about them being aligned to Orion and stuff. And I'm going, wait, what's going on? Hang on. And then got deeply into digging everything I could find up about Graham Hancock. And then he announced he was going to be on Coast to Coast. And I was totally familiar with Coast to Coast, but I never listened to it because I didn't really like talk radio because my dad listened to Rush Limbaugh religiously. And it drove me crazy.
As so I can imagine.
Said, huh?
I can imagine, yeah.
So I was like, but I want to hear Graham Hancock, so maybe I'll check this out. And I figured, it's 4 hours long. I'm not going to listen to all of it. I listened to all of it. And then I was like, that was great. That was fantastic. And that was with George Norrie. I mean, that was, post Art Bell.
Mm-hmm.
And then Graham at some point put up a link to a torrent or something that had all of his Coast to Coast interviews, the ones with Art Bell, the ones with George Norrie. And I was like, oh, yeah, I need that. So I downloaded that and listened to all of those. And then I was like, there's probably other shows out there. And again, not really thinking podcasts. This is, early 2000s. Podcasts weren't really a thing yet, but they were starting to mid-2000s. I'm not even sure when the whole thing kicked in. But I found him on other shows. And then I realized there were other guests on these shows I also wanted to hear. So that's how I kind of started listening to this stuff and kind of shifted my mind on, whether or not I cared about, listening to someone talk for an hour. And after that, I heard people that I wanted to talk to on shows that were just awful. Most of the shows I listened to I liked, but there were a few where I was like, oh, I really want to hear this guy. And I put it on and go, wow, the host is awful. They don't know anything. They're just, and I'm like, why do they get to talk to these people and I don't? Because
exactly,
I actually know their work, and I would really love to talk to them. So I went to my radio station, again, not thinking podcast. I went to my radio station and I said, hey, could I get an hour to do this show? And they said yes. And I was like, all right, great. And the first interview, actually, before I asked them, the first interview I did was with Walter Cruttenton on his book, Lost Star of Myth and Time. I think that's the title of it. But I talked to him, and I said what I wanted to do, and I said, it'll be on the music show, but it's kind of a trial run, if you don't mind doing it. He was perfectly fine with it, and it came out really well, which gave me a little bit of confidence that I could actually do this, because my concern was, yeah, I know their stuff, but can I hold down a conversation with them that doesn't suck?
Right.
And I wasn't sure. So, I did that, and it was like, okay, no, that was pretty good. I liked that. And then I asked them, they said yes, and I started doing the show. That was the beginning. The first show was January 26th of 2013. Prior to that, the name I actually had thrown on a blog that I did, where I just, just various paranormal stuff I wrote up. I didn't really have a good name for it, and when that name had come up, I can get into the story of the name if you want.
Yeah, actually, I would love to hear how the name came about, actually.
So it has nothing at all to do with the paranormal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I am a huge wrestling fan.
Okay.
And I have worked with doing promotion for different organizations throughout the years, going back to ECW in the 90s. We did some radio promotion for them and stuff. And so I've gotten to meet different people throughout the years. We had gone to a local promotions show in Watertown, and we hung around afterwards, interviewed a bunch of the wrestlers that were there. And when we were leaving, it was at a state fair. We were leaving, and everything was dark because the fair was closed, and, it was after hours.
Right.
And it was in Watertown. I've never actually been into Watertown. I'd driven past Watertown before. It's in very upper New York by Canada.
Yep.
And as we came out, we were like, okay, let's get some food. But we didn't know which way to go. We knew right went to the highway, and left was dark, and straight looked like it had some light. So it's like, okay, the main part of the city is probably straight. So we start driving straight, and it kind of dips down very suddenly. And the next thing we know, we're on gravel, and then grass. And I go, where did the road go? and my friend sitting in the passenger seat goes, where did the road go? And my girlfriend in the back goes, did you just say, where did the road go? And I slammed on the brakes right before we went down this steep decline into a building.
Oh, my goodness.
And basically what it was it was like an industrial area. So the road wasn't really anything special, Right,
yeah, kind of like a dead end into the industrial area.
Where everything was. It's so, like, I didn't realize this till I looked on a map later and went, oh, yeah, okay, And so I was telling a friend of mine the story, and she goes, that should be the name of the memoirs for the Last Exit for the Lost. Where did the road go? And I'm thinking, that's funny, but I'll never do that. And then I'm like, but the blog needs a name. And it's a great name for something with the paranormal, especially with the way I approach this stuff, where I'm not following the assumptions that are placed on all of this stuff.
Yeah, more of like an open-ended question kind of format.
Yeah. And so that became the name. People liked it, so that was good. And it kind of fits because on the radio, it's where did the road go right into the Last Exit for the Lost.
Yeah, it's a nice pairing, and it definitely has a good ring to it for a paranormal themed show.
Yeah, and it also doesn't limit what the show is about.
Yeah, you're not kind of boxing it in as like the UFO hour or the, pinning it down to one specific subject.
I think it would have driven me crazy trying to come up with a name for it if I didn't already have that on the blog. So
right.
Luckily, my friend suggested it as a name, or it may never have happened.
That's perfect. Well, that's often, I think, the best kind of best names, best titles come unexpectedly like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a neat story. So you got the radio show going, and then did you move into YouTube, I guess, shortly after that?
Oh, yeah, the first show was on YouTube.
Okay.
I wanted to put it everywhere I could, just to get some exposure. I didn't think anyone was going to care because we don't do sensationalistic type of stuff. And it seemed like every show I was listening to had a lot of sensationalist type of stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of like, no one's going to care because I want to take this kind of serious and grounded and, not just for entertainment. Like, I actually want to try and talk to these people and see what we can figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I put it on iTunes, which was a nightmare. And I started putting it on YouTube. I didn't even realize people listened to stuff on YouTube at the time. I just figured, well, it's somewhere else I could throw it. And YouTube blew up almost immediately. As soon as I had David Weatherly on with the Black Eyed Kids, I mean, the views went into the thousands, and that was like the third show, I think.
That must have been really encouraging then.
Oh, extremely. And the thing, too, about being on the radio, I mean, it's a commercial radio station. It covers most of central New York, so I think it was easier for me to get guests at first because they're like, okay, well, it's on the real radio. It's not someone just doing a podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
So bigger name people were willing to actually talk to me. And the more bigger name people I had, the more other people were willing to talk to me.
Yeah, you definitely get that snowball effect. And I'm sure it was great, too, to have that platform of terrestrial radio in the background in broadcasting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew what I was doing going in, so there was no learning curve to figure all this stuff out because I've been doing it for years.
Yeah, so starting Where Did the Road Go, did that really kind of kick off your interest in fringe and paranormal topics, or was that...
Oh, no, I've always been interested in that stuff, and I've had lifelong experiences that are very, very strange.
Right, so it was something that you found an outlet for more than something that came along with the show.
Yeah, I always felt like there was something I was supposed to do with all this stuff, but I didn't know what. And, I considered, well, maybe I should write a book, but I'm thinking, do people really read books about people's personal experiences? And, I really wasn't sure what to do, and this was just it just clicked, like, when I started doing it.
Cool. So
I am working on a book, too, but that's, the whole time I've been doing the show, I've basically been working on the book, and it's only, a quarter of the way done, maybe.
I imagine as you go along, you're just kind of gathering more and more content, that it must be hard to be your own editor in that sense.
Yeah, well, it's a combination of things. It's that, and it's also finding different ways to look at these experiences. Mike Cleland, when I had him on the first time, we were talking about my UFO sighting, and he's like, well, what was happening at the time? Which no one had ever asked. And I went, I don't know. And so I went back and looked and went, that was in a major turning point in my life, which is what he said. He's like, I'll bet you there was a lot of change going on. It's like, yeah, there was. So now I'm like, now I got to go back through all this stuff and see if there are patterns that I missed the first time I went back through all this. Because I've been keeping notes since 1990.
Wow.
And it's a lot to go through.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I totally recommend people do it regardless, because it also can show you how much you've changed. The way you view things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Plus having that wider view of things. Like, when you're experiencing them, it doesn't necessarily look the same as when you're able to look back and not just remember, but actually see what was going on when you wrote it down. And you're going, wow, so that's what really happened. It just changes the picture.
Yeah, it must give you a lot of hindsight, or a lot of kind of context that you might not otherwise be able to put together.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was, and the fact that, when I did this, I was told to write down everything, not just the weird stuff. And so I'm glad I did, because now I'm looking back going, yeah, a lot of the weirdest stuff happened at points of transition.
That's really interesting. Do you find that's something that a lot of the people you talk to notice with these kinds of experiences?
Yes, not all the time, but there's definitely a factor. And you get it even with simple things like people moving into new houses or remodeling. That's when, haunted activity starts kicking up. And it may not be that ghosts are disturbed as much as change opens you up to this stuff.
Right. That kind of that in between, I guess, is kind of
the liminal.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's That's something else I was wanting to get your kind of thoughts and opinions on. I mean, having a YouTube channel like this or a platform like this where you're so open to bringing on just kind of regular people and, people that deal with these kinds of things more seriously as well. But um, I mean, the amount of stories you must receive must be like overwhelming sometimes.
Yes, completely, and I love it, honestly. But the problem is I can't keep up with the emails, and it's the other thing is like I have email. I have two emails for people to write or three.
Hmm.
There's a thing on the website people can write me through. People write me on Facebook. They write the Facebook page. They shoot me messages on Twitter, Instagram. And so it's like I'll read something and be like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I'll be like, where was that?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I feel bad when I don't get back to people. I mean, I try to. But what ends up happening is I'll get something that's really interesting and they'll be like, okay, I need more than 10 seconds to respond to this email. Like, I actually want to write a significant amount back to this person. And then it gets kind of lost, like it just gets buried down in the inbox. And
Yeah.
even if I mark it like, hey, respond to this, the inbox just gets swamped every day. And then the
Yeah.
next thing I know, I'm 6 months later going through old emails going, oh, I never answered that one.
Yeah. That must be tough. I mean, there's only so many hours in a day, and especially when you want to give a kind of thoughtful response, you don't want to just, off the cuff.
Right. Hey, that's nice. Great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. But I imagine you must also get like some kind of unwanted attention at times.
Yeah, at
'Cause
times not a lot. I mean, occasionally people will write me that want to come on the show, and they're not either their content is not quite what we cover,
right.
um, or they're I had one guy write me where he was like talking about how the world was going to end next week, and he needed to come on the show immediately to tell everyone and warn everyone, and I was like, no.
No. Yeah.
And he wasn't even willing to give details. It was just, that was like it, and he just needed to come on. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And we're
mean,
still here, so
I was gonna say if I had a nickel for every failed doomsday prophecy, I'd have at least a Starbucks coffee or by now.
and so I mean, I get that occasionally. I mean, we get the occasional trolls on YouTube. Not
Right.
not a lot. I mean, YouTube is known for its trolls, but we don't get a ton of negative comments on YouTube. I don't think the show invites that. I think the fact that we're not looking for the lowest common denominator in listenership means the trolls aren't really that interested.
Yeah,
You know,
I think that kind of response is definitely a testament to the kind of content that you run though, because like you said, and I should put it out there and give you kudos right now. You don't run clickbait.
no.
So you really there's no kind of there's no or there's less attraction, I guess, for people that just want to fuck around, that be trolls, that kind of thing. So I think that's
And we,
sorry. Go
go ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the biggest negative comments we tend to get is anytime we mention the flat Earth thing. People will get all upset if we make fun of the flat Earth people. And even some people who aren't flat earthers who are like, well, you should have more of an open mind about this stuff. And I'm like, there's a line somewhere. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm very open minded about this stuff. But the flat Earth, I mean, it's interesting in a sociological sort of view, but it's not something I could take seriously. There's just too much evidence to the contrary, and none really for it. And the evidence for it is very shallow.
well, exactly. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, right? And yeah, I agree. I think the flat Earth movement, I guess you could call it now, it's maybe reached that level of popularity. But I mean, yeah, it's interesting maybe from a kind of sociological or a cultural
Yeah.
perspective, but it's very, I mean, you're just inviting a whole host of nonsense, I think, when you start entertaining things like that
And it
from
drops right down a rabbit hole.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, to be honest, I'm convinced they're all trolls. Like, I can't,
I don't think they are. I really don't.
I don't
I
know.
think
I can't imagine, I mean, I can't imagine it being more than like, a very small percentage that are genuinely pursuing that as like a working theory. Like, it has to be people that are just, you know, out to pull people's legs, get a reaction, kind of rile up and distract other conversations. But I could
it,
be wrong.
I'm sure that's some of it, but I think what it is, it's a almost an overreaction to the lies that we get fed from official sources. I mean, the government always lies. And that doesn't mean I believe every conspiracy theory or anything like that, but the government is going to take whatever really happens and twist it to their benefit.
Yeah,
Politicians,
there's always
yeah,
spin.
and politicians are going to do the same thing. Our academic structure is set up in such a way that the status quo needs to be kept. So again, they're going to ignore things that are against the status quo. Um, I point to the electric universe theory as one of those things where you're starting to see some of the ideas permeate into the mainstream a little bit, but they have some really interesting stuff there, and they will send a probe out, and they'll put a list of predictions up. This is what we're going to find based on the EU theory, and then you'll see the list of what NASA expects to find, and after the fact, I'll look at it and be like, okay, so NASA was almost completely wrong, and the EU theory was completely right, except for these two things which were not confirmed one way or the other. And it's like, that alone to me says people should take a better look at this. No theory is ever going to be 100%, but there's something to this, but they
Hmm.
won't, because it's just this, no, that's wrong, we're never going to look at it.
Yeah, there's definitely I think people definitely have a negative reaction to the kind of institutional dogma,
Yeah,
especially when, like you said, there is so much cynicism with mainstream institutions and governments being caught in, countless lies and half
yeah.
truths and all of that kind of thing. So, I mean, I guess from that perspective, I could see the flat Earth being a kind of a reactionary movement. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, you only have so many hours to broadcast, right? So you have to.
And even, I'll even look at, when someone says, well, the moon landing was fake. I fully believe we went to the moon. I don't, but I also don't dismiss the fact that NASA may not have shown us the actual footage
Hmm.
um, for various reasons. I mean, we were in a space race with Russia, and they may not have wanted Russia to know exactly how we got there. So they may have faked some of the footage. They may have also been worried something was going to go wrong, and the last thing they want is a live broadcast of their spaceship blowing up.
Exactly. Yeah, I've always suspected that there's kind of half truths on both sides of the moon landing, kind of conspiracy versus it happened 100% the way we watched it kind of
Yeah.
arguments.
And I do think that they were very concerned they were going to find ancient artifacts up there, and they don't want that live.
No,
Um,
there's definitely there's all kinds of very obvious reasons why they would want secrecy around a lot of that kind of thing.
when they used to broadcast all the space probes live, and when people started noticing things that shouldn't be there, then they started selling out the probes to contractors. So now it's not public, even though NASA's public. Well, so and so is actually running this probe, so it's no longer public, and they could get the data themselves, look it over, and then release it.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that there had been a kind of move to subcontracting like that.
Yeah, they turned it into private data because NASA, well, as long as the public was funding it, they pretty much had to put it out there live. I mean,
Right.
that's because the public's funding it. But if this corporation is funding it and using NASA, then they can say, well, they get first look at the data, then they'll release it.
Right. Yeah, they can restrict the access more easily.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of is a nice segue into something else I wanted to ask you about, because there's definitely an overlap, at least in popular perception, I think, between kind of paranormal topics and conspiracy. And I think that this has kind of been propagated by popular shows in a lot of ways, especially as much as I have enjoyed listening. As much as I enjoyed listening to Art Bell, and still enjoy listening to Coast, they're probably the number one perpetrators of this kind of conflation of conspiracy, kind of government-based conspiracy and paranormal topics, and kind of putting them all under the same tent.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, some of them overlap. I mean, if you think the government's hiding aliens, you know, you have the UFO and the conspiracy stuff right there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just branches out to other conspiracies like the moon landing and stuff. And again, the moon landing, there's, you know, one of the reasons they say they faked it. Some people will say we didn't go, and other people will say, well, they found artifacts there, so we're never going to see the footage. I mean, there's some weird stuff up there. There's weird stuff on the moon. There's weird stuff on Mars. You know, it's hard to say what it is because we're not there.
Yeah.
But we have no idea if some group within our own government has been there. You know, I mean, we have no idea how advanced, you know, the black projects in our own government are.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, getting reliable access to that kind of information is
Never
really
gonna happen.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean, do you think that that's been a kind of like a positive for this kind of research and these kinds of investigations, or do you think that kind of overlap has kind of like damaged the pursuit of this kind of research?
I would say more damaged because it drags it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Conspiracy culture can really get out of hand, kind of like the flat Earth thing, where it's just once people start not believing, you know, it's like everything becomes a conspiracy, and it's very easy to ridicule. And when you can throw the paranormal, which already has a ton of ridicule put onto it,
Mm-hmm.
into that same thing, it really just kind of makes it worse.
Yeah,
Really.
it does seem to muddy the waters a lot.
And I almost wonder if some of the conspiracy theorists are simply trying to muddy the waters. You know, if they're not, you know, FBI agents basically putting this stuff out there and coming up with ridiculous conspiracies to get people to not look at the real conspiracies. Because, I mean, we have a history, an absolute history of conspiracies that go back, you know, as long as this country's been around, practically, but especially going back to the Kennedy assassination and forward, where, you know, they just do what they want and tell us what they want us to think.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean everything's a conspiracy. It doesn't mean every time some crazy person shoots a bunch of people with a gun that it was some kind of mind control project. But there's some weird stuff in some of these cases where you're going, okay, that doesn't add up, and that doesn't add up. So
Yeah.
it's kind of good to have those conspiracy theorists out there, at least to point that stuff out. But you gotta weed through it very carefully, and then you end up going down a rabbit hole. It's kind of like I don't know, you know. I look at 9/11 and I say I don't believe that we were lied to about 9/11. I could say that because the government spun it to their advantage. Even if our government had nothing at all to do with it, and no other government had anything to do with it, and it was actual terrorists who attacked us, the government still lied and twisted it to fulfill their want to go into the Middle East.
Yeah, yeah, and used it for their agenda. Absolutely.
Right. So they lied no matter what. To what degree they lied, if it's something they let happen or what, I don't know. You know, like there's not enough solid evidence to say one way or another. The problem is there was a great video on YouTube that I'm sure I saved it somewhere because the guy was an engineer and he saw a video or saw this debunking 9/11 on like National Geographic. And in there, they said, well, people say thermite burned through these beams, and that's not possible, and we're going to prove it. So they took a block of thermite, and they put it on a beam that was like one of the ones in the Twin Towers, and they set it off, and the thermite blew away from the beam. And he went, they didn't really try. So he got some thermate, which is very similar to thermite, but easy to make. And he got one of these beams. And he replicated their experiment, and then he started fiddling with it a little bit. And after about 6 tries, he got the thermite burning straight through the beam. And he's like, huh. And it looked exactly like the beams in the Twin Towers.
Really?
And so he sat there and going, so that is what happened. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's a possibility of what happened.
Yeah.
Because you've now proved that that's at least a possibility. You didn't prove it happened. And this is the jump that people make.
Right.
It takes a lot more to prove something than it does to prove that something is possible. You can connect dots in a lot of different ways and say this is a possibility, but people get very locked into their beliefs. They believe that's what happened. And so anything that supports that, it's confirmation bias in a sense.
Yeah, and that's what I see a lot of in the kind of conspiracy channels and communities is a lot of confirmation bias and also these, like you were saying, these easy leaps, without really making the distinction between possibility and proof of happening, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, and it just, it can lead, it seems to kind of perpetuate itself. It kind of throws people into doubt, which is perfectly understandable. But then that doubt almost seems to become like a self-defeating kind of prophecy where, people, it's like you can't believe anything anymore and you just kind of lose touch in a way almost.
Yeah. I go with doubt everything.
Yeah, that's...
doubt everything, question everything, constantly question your beliefs and kind of try and... It's hard to do, but the more you can do it, the more likely you are going to be on solid ground when you're done.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, besides the kind of proliferation of conspiracy theory that I think we've definitely seen with the rise of like YouTube for sure, the internet more generally, and then people like George Norrie and we'll go a bit easy on Norrie. He's not really so much focused on that, but definitely with people like Alex Jones. But kind of accompanying that, the paranormals really seem like maybe it's kind of starting to taper off now, but it really saw like a boom in popular culture and mainstream media. And that, too, I think has had kind of like a mixed bag of benefits and bring downs for people who genuinely want to pursue these topics in a sincere way.
Well, I see, I think the thing that really started to kick it off in the last, however long it's been now, was when ghost hunters got popular.
Yeah.
They were like one of the first mainstream paranormal shows, and then tons of them followed after this. And the other one was Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
From a different perspective. And I felt like they were very limited. They're obviously meant for entertainment, but they allowed people to talk about this stuff more. So people could watch Ghost Hunters, realize Ghost Hunters was really popular, and then maybe not be so afraid to talk about their weird experience because, it was a popular thing.
Yeah.
And the same with Ancient Aliens, where it got into people's heads where it became a possibility. It wasn't something just to laugh off. So it kind of gave people confidence to talk about their weird experiences. And I think in some cases, people would then dig in further and try and find, how many ghost hunting groups popped up because of ghost hunters.
Tons, I imagine.
Yeah, and so it was a good thing overall. I don't think a lot of people get really, really deep into this stuff. I mean, some people certainly do, but I think it's a minority. Most people, it's like it interests them, it's fun, and then after a while they stopped doing.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation at the water cooler, or but like you said, I think that is a major kind of change where it became a more normal piece of conversation.
Yeah, and back in December when the New York Times article came out, basically saying that UFOs are real, our culture is so screwed up at this point that nobody noticed.
I
Like
know, I know.
the
Wasn't that
UFO,
strange, eh?
the UFO people noticed, and the believers were going, "It's disclosure, it's happening," and we got a lot of heat for basically saying, "No, it's not. This is nothing. It's going to blow over," which seems to be exactly what happened.
Yeah,
We're seven
absolutely.
7 months away now since that happened, and the things they followed it up with were unimpressive and not really generating any major shift in the UFO community.
No, I was really surprised how quickly that tapered off.
It was with all the political stuff going on, people were just like, yeah, okay, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. It's like something that would have captured everyone's attention, I don't know, maybe a few years ago.
Yeah,
And now it's like it's just lost in a sea of headlines about Trump.
and on top of that, they're putting out videos. The first video they put out and made such a big deal about had been available on the net for years.
Yeah.
It wasn't like here's an alien spaceship up close. And I did give them credit where they never said these were extraterrestrial or anything else. They just said that there's something here and we don't know what it is. And I went, okay, well, you get good,
Yeah.
but it just fell away. And the few videos they released after that were kind of the same thing. They were either stuff that already came out or stuff that was really inconclusive.
Yeah.
It could have been test craft that they were like, let's run this test craft and see what our pilots make of it, you know? But without more context, more data, the stuff was pretty much useless. It didn't make really any splash. That first article made a little bit, and then there was just nothing. And I saw all kinds of jokes going that the government, the world is so screwed up that the government announced UFOs are real and no one noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's kind of funny, like, because I remember one of the first shows that really got me interested in unexplained phenomenon and paranormal was Unsolved Mysteries,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah, I
way
loved
back in the
unsolved
day.
mysteries.
Yeah, and that show, I mean, because they covered all kinds of unexplained mysteries, crimes and missing people and all kinds of things. So it was like, as much as they were a kind of commercial, soundbite TV show, I kind of felt like Unsolved Mysteries was approached these kinds of things with a bit more legitimacy than,
Yes,
say, Ghost Hunters or Ancient Aliens. And actually, I mean, the kind of footage and stories that Unsolved Mysteries were featuring were not really that much different from what came out, say, half a year ago.
true,
Um,
true. Yeah, they would every once in a while, and I kept a lot of those. I have VHS tapes with a lot of those paranormal stories from Unsolved Mysteries on them. But yeah, they treated them the same way they treated anything else going on the show. It
yeah.
wasn't. There was no laugh track behind. Oh, these people saw a UFO. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, like, oh, what were they smoking, kind of thing. Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
they had some. There was one story from Unsolved Mysteries I always remember because it happened quite close to where I grew up. There was a UFO sighting outside of Ottawa in Ontario that had been sent in on a VHS tape. I think and it was an anonymous sender. I don't think they ever found out who sent it, but and I mean, we're talking 1990s quality video, but it was
Yeah.
really compelling, and it was really, I think, the first story that really, like, captivated me and really captured my imagination and everything. So it's, yeah, the kind of, you definitely see, I think, um, the way the paranormal is addressed in media and popular culture tends to follow fads in some ways and
Hmm.
trends, but
Yep.
but it's also something that is like universal and has been, recurring throughout our recorded history. So it's it's an interesting pattern to kind of follow, I guess, in that sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also liked Sightings. Sightings was a pretty decent show on that stuff.
Okay, I don't remember that one. We might not have gotten that up north of the
In
border here.
Canada,
Yeah.
yeah. The other thing is like that. You mentioned that VHS being sent in. That's interesting for the time period. But now, video means nothing. Photographs mean nothing. They're
Yeah.
so easy to fake.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that all of this stuff is fake. It's just, it's so hard to tell. Because you can make such a good video or a intentionally bad video, and you don't know. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
it
it's
takes other
funny.
factors.
It's funny how that's really been like a total reversal, where video footage used to be kind of like almost like the holy grail of evidence, and now it's, you could just kind of slough it off.
And I think it was Steven Spielberg made some comment that with the proliferation of video technology, no one sees UFOs anymore, or something like that. And I'm thinking, well, that's not true. Not only is that not true, but there's so many UFO videos, it's absurd.
Yeah, it's like a glut of evidence or something.
Yeah, and then the other problem, too, is even if the video's legit, we don't know what we're looking at. And we have not only black projects and secret technology in our own government, but things like drones,
Mm-hmm.
that are readily available for a small amount of money that you can just fly around in the sky. And how do you tell the difference if all you're seeing is a light?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge point now. I mean, not only is the kind of technology become so much easier to manipulate from a photographic and video point of view, but also the proliferation of, like you said, like drone technology is so accessible. And yeah, so it's kind of where you'd think it might have made it easier to pin these things down. It's actually almost made it more complicated.
Right. And I mean, you can go to, you see what seems like a large craft move across the sky, and you can call the local Air Force base and say, is this one of ours? They may or may not know, and they may or may not tell you if they do.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, besides the kind of, more mainstream attention these things have gotten, I was curious if you're much of a Joe Rogan fan or listener, because he's, I think, one of probably the most well-known podcaster
Yeah.
who is actually willing to have a lot of guests on to talk about, alternate theories of history and exploring consciousness and even
Absolutely.
conspiracy theory.
And he's had Graham Hancock on many, many times.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know how many, but he's had him on a bunch of times, which is awesome.
yeah,
I like Joe Rogan. I liked him back when he was in News Radio. News Radio was one of my favorite shows, and it's funny to see him then and see what he is now.
yeah.
Because you never could see that. You never would have seen that coming.
No.
But yeah, he's clearly a smart guy, but he's also a very down to earth guy, and that's important. He comes across as an everyman, but he's smart, and so he can connect with people because of that. And he sort of changed the way this stuff is delivered. He doesn't mind swearing or telling whatever story he wants to tell on the air. Rather than keeping it in like a sterile, professional sort of thing. So it makes it more entertaining for people.
Yeah, I think he's got a great kind of conversation style, and it's like you said, I think he's brought some legitimacy in some ways to his guests, and I've also noticed that he's kind of almost made it more comfortable for people who don't usually deal with these kinds of things to talk about their experiences. Like,
oh yeah,
I was just recently watching an interview he did with Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, and near the end of the interview, I can't remember how it came about, but Billy Corgan ended up telling him about an experience he had where he claims that he saw a shapeshifter. Which, is definitely not something you're going to get out of your typical kind of rock and roll interview, right? So,
Yeah.
But
and Billy's also a wrestling fan, oddly enough.
Yeah, I think he bought...
he bought TNA at one point, yeah.
Right, that was it, yeah.
It all went very badly.
Oh, no.
Lawsuits and all kinds of messes, but yeah, he's an interesting guy too. I mean, he has a lot going on and gone in a lot of different directions. So
yeah, but I thought that stood out to me because it was just kind of I thought it was interesting to see a platform where someone like him could come on and talk about. I mean, he talked a bit about his time, working in pro wrestling management and stuff like that, and then also go on to talk about these kinds of very personal and interesting, weird experiences that he's had. So
I've always said I have kind of a trifecta of like not acceptable sort of cultural things, because I'm into the paranormal, which is not widely accepted. I've always been into metal, which has always been sort of counterculture and not widely accepted.
Yep.
And I've always been into wrestling, which, kind of falls in that weird sort of thing where it's not a sport, but it is a sport. And, it stays in that liminal area. Like, liminality is the thing that draws me in, I think. But it's like, yeah, so I like all the things that most people go look at and laugh, because they don't get it.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. There's definitely seems to be a personality type that is drawn to the specific and kind of often paired areas. It was funny, I was at a heavy metal conference actually at the University of Victoria a few years back, and I think every presenter there was either a medieval studies major or an English major of some kind. So there's definitely something that appeals to a certain kind of mind.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I mean, and metal itself is so diverse that it incorporates every other music form. It's someone recently called it like the new folk music because it incorporates everything.
Right.
It's so diverse and it's so unique in a lot of ways. So you got everything from dumb, tough guy metal to really smart, complex, classically inspired metal to, everything in between.
Oh, yeah.
Every culture, pretty much every country short of Antarctica, unless you count Guar, have a band, even small little country, there'll be a metal band there.
Yeah.
Metal, Iron Maiden was like the first band to play in Russia when the curtain fell.
Yeah, and even apparently before the USSR fell, they had like a kind of burgeoning metal scene there too, which is it's a fascinating topic for another time maybe.
But it's definitely in that liminal thing where people don't treat it the same as they treat other music. They either don't get it or they're fine with it. I mean, it's on an upswing now, just like all this other stuff. So now metal's kind of okay.
Yeah. But back a bit to the show, I guess. Yes. You've had some really fascinating guests on, but you've also had some like fairly big name guests on. And one of the things that's been really present, not just in kind of paranormal media and circles lately, but even in the mainstream, is the work that David Paulides has been doing on missing people, specifically missing people in forests and national park areas.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering what your take on that phenomenon was and kind of what you took away from your interviews with David.
Well, my take on it, it's definitely shifted over time. David's done an impressive volume of work, but I think David's wrong, and I had said this when he first came on, that a lot of these cases would prove to be not unusual.
Right.
They may look unusual, but if we had more facts and more data, we would find that they weren't unusual. And since the first time I had him on, I've talked to people who are experts and stuff. Like David would say, search dogs are near perfect in the way that they track people. I've talked to now a number of people who have worked with tracking dogs, and they'll be like, no, that's not true at all. Tracking dogs a lot of times don't find a scent. So that pin, that pin that he put in there and said, well, one of the things is dogs don't find a scent, now isn't as much of a factor when you look at this stuff. And they'll say in bad weather, the dogs really have trouble in the scent. And one of the things he's noted is a lot of these things are followed by bad weather.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, that might be part of why the dogs aren't finding a scent. I've talked to people who have researched things like hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
And David will insist a lot of these cases could not be hypothermia, but they've looked at them and said, yeah, this could be hypothermia. So there's definitely weird stuff in David's cases.
Yeah.
But if he has, say, 1,000 cases, I think maybe 100 to 200 are genuinely weird.
Right.
And then that changes the picture a little bit, and it's like, okay, so if you were able to go through and figure out which ones were definitely weird, would those patterns still exist? Like, how would it change the pattern?
Yeah, exactly. Because then, I mean, you're looking at a whole new set of statistics, basically.
Right. So I've been slowly kind of collecting that type of data because what he has unearthed is important. I mean, if people are disappearing, we should be more aware of it and what might be behind it and what to do to not disappear.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's definitely important that he's raising some awareness, because obviously you want people to be as vigilant as they can be and staying safe and taking all the necessary precautions and everything. But at the same time, like you said, I mean, I've always found that he's been a bit hesitant is maybe a little bit too charitable, but he's always been hesitant to really nail down or even put out his own conclusions. And that kind of gives me a bit of concern that he's kind of generating a bit more fear than he is solutions, I guess.
Yeah. When he first started, he thought it was Bigfoot.
Okay, yeah. I remember that was kind of the way that his interviews were contextualized at first.
Yeah, he, for whatever reason, realized that wasn't a good thing. So I think only the very first interview he did about missing 411 anywhere, he mentions thinking that it was Bigfoot. Now, there are Bigfoot accounts where Bigfoot has kidnapped people or tried to kidnap people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it fits with that narrative. But I think as he got more stories, he realized that didn't quite work. I mean, the first two books, you'll see a lot of stories where, the child will come back and they'll say, well, where were you? And they'll say, well, the bear man took me or the dog man took me.
Yeah.
And obviously it wasn't an animal. So the natural thing is, well, maybe it was Bigfoot or whatever Bigfoot is. But as he kept going, I think he realized some of these stories are really strange, and they're not fitting the Bigfoot narrative. There's, in all likelihood, a bunch of different stuff going on. And I don't know that the parks are necessarily covering it up. I think they're being, there's money involved. So they don't want to bring this stuff to the forefront.
No, definitely. You can understand something like the Park Service or the parks individually wanting to kind of protect a reputation. I mean, you don't want people thinking that it's not safe to bring your family to the park.
Right, and you figure the number of people who disappear versus the number of people who go to these parks, it's, 0.0001% of people disappear or something like that. It's not where people go to these parks and are constantly disappearing.
Exactly, right.
So, and him not settling on something, he's definitely leaning more toward the UFO thing now. But again, I think there's a bunch of stuff going on, and I think I don't think he knows. And it's probably better not to just put everything in one camp.
Yeah.
And, than to just kind of keep it open. I mean, I don't think it would hurt him to speculate and throw out a few different ideas of what might be going on. But he chooses not to, and that's his choice. That's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I know he's done a little bit of work outside of the US, looking at cases in Canada and I think some overseas too. I might be mistaken on that. Yeah, Australia.
Yeah.
But I know, like, for instance, in Canada on the West Coast, where majority of people go missing, I've always thought that, like you said, it's a combination of all types of misfortunes that happen to people, right? And especially when you're out there and you see how rugged and kind of treacherous the wilderness can be. I mean, there's places where, if you out walking at night, one wrong step could mean you're down a cliff, right? And
yeah.
probably no one will ever find a trace of you again. So there's definitely that, which I think probably would account for a lot of the cases. But there's some weird things too. I don't know if you've heard about the feet that wash up on shore on Vancouver Island.
Yeah, they seem to have had a pretty solid theory of what's going on there.
Yeah.
Which is currents and things like that, and how feet, especially feet in shoes, will come off once someone's in the water and drowned.
Yeah, and then the shoes make them float and carry them away. But it's definitely, it's one of those kind of just strange little occurrences.
It's weird.
Yeah,
it's definitely weird.
Yeah, that definitely make you wonder. But like I said, I mean, it's that's such a target destination for people that want to do wilderness adventures and hiking and visit remote locations, and it's not hard to imagine how people lose their way and their feet end up washing up on shore.
Yeah. But anyway, apparently they said the way the currents go, they could just fall off a boat in the Pacific Ocean, and there's a decent % chance that eventually their foot will wash up in that area because of the way the currents move.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's still, like I said, it's weird. It's weird that it's that one spot, but when you look at all the data, it's kind of like, okay, I guess that's believable. That's a decent explanation.
Yeah.
I took a wider view of it because originally they thought they were just people jumping off the bridges there and stuff like that, but it turns out they weren't people who were necessarily local that the feet were washing up from.
Yeah, and also, I think when that first started coming out about 10 years ago, it was around the same time that one of Canada's big serial killer cases was breaking. Fellow named Robert Pickton out in BC. So I think that kind of really stirred up a lot of the attention around it too, where because there had been this like horrific and notorious case in the news, and then at the same time you're hearing about feet washing up, it's really easy for people to, make that connection.
Yeah. There's a podcast I listen to called Tennis, which I absolutely love. It's a fictional podcast, but they take a lot of real stuff and mix it together. And the way they mix it together is not totally off of the way I approach this stuff in a more holistic sort of way. And I don't know, I've tried to get the people who do it to come on and do an interview, but they have not responded. But it's a great show. And they actually incorporate the feet in a very weird way in one episode.
Oh, really? Oh, I'll have to check that out.
And I don't want to spoil it because it's really good. And it's, it's a great show to begin. It's like 3 seasons in, I think, and it's really brilliant.
Okay.
Their approach to weirdness, I absolutely love it.
Cool. Well, no spoilers, but thank you for the recommendation. We'll definitely check that out.
And like I
So
said, I'd love to talk to them and see if they actually, like if it's just one of these things where they just follow this stuff, or if they're actually interested in it, or they don't believe in any of it, but they think it makes a good story.
yeah, yeah, it would be interesting to hear some of their motivation, how they put things together.
I know when I was talking to, I can't remember, was it Jeffrey Craner? I think I can't remember who I talked to from Welcome to Night Vale, but they said, "Well, yeah, I go to the bookstore, and if I see stuff on UFOs and paranormal, he's like, I'm buying it." I didn't necessarily get the feeling that he necessarily believed it, but he found it interesting.
Yeah, well, that's something that, I mean, that's kind of a topic that you've explored, I think, on Where Did the Road Go more than any other kind of paranormal channel that I've become aware of is, like just why is this kind of thing interesting to people? Why is it important to explore? Like, what is it about our kind of consciousness or where we
Yeah,
see ourselves that draws us to these kinds of mysteries, you know?
and it was actually Joseph Fink I talked to. I
Oh,
just
okay.
looked it up. It was last year. I don't remember that far back. But yeah, so I mean, when I look at this stuff, to me, and particularly with the UFO phenomena, I feel like that's kind of a linchpin to a lot of this stuff. I don't think it's extraterrestrial, although I don't rule that out. I don't rule anything necessarily out because we don't know. I don't have an answer, so I can't say anything is necessarily right or wrong because we simply don't know.
Yeah.
But I think in understanding this stuff, part of what it's doing is it's making us, um, it's teaching us about ourselves, about how we interact with things, about consciousness, about who we are, what this is that we're in. Because realistically, we don't know what life is necessarily. I mean, we know if something's alive, we think.
Yeah.
We don't know what death is. We don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what reality is. I mean, we can break it down in pieces. We can say, well, everything you perceive is just vibrations of energy. Okay, well, that's something. That's definitely a step in the right direction, but it doesn't tell us on a grander scale why there's vibrations of energy or where they're coming from or why any of this stuff is here, really. And every theory of cosmic creation, from the Big Bang on, it all relies on something being there. I mean,
Yeah.
for the Big Bang to have happened, there had to be a singularity to begin with, to explode into
Right.
the Big Bang. So, I don't think we can fully comprehend what we exist inside of. Um, and I don't think we can fully comprehend consciousness. And I think a lot of reality is driven by consciousness. And when we study this stuff that is liminal, that is on the edges of what we understand, I think that has the promise of teaching us more about where we are and who we are than than science will, in a straight analytical sort of way.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that leads me to two questions that I'm like dying to get to here. So, you've pointed out in some of these discussions you've had on Where Did the Road Go about, kind of why this kind of research is important and what it means to us just as humans, really. And in those discussions, you brought up something that I hadn't ever really considered much before, but you pointed out the similarities between what we would usually think of as totally different categories of
Mm-hmm.
paranormal or supernatural experience, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like what Joshua named Joshua Cutchin named the wilderness poltergeist. I had
exactly,
pointed out
yeah.
that people who go out hunting for Bigfoot or think they have a Bigfoot encounter, if they're not hunting for it, a lot of times they'll hear knocking on wood. They'll stones will get thrown at them. They'll hear weird vocalizations, and then you look at poltergeist encounters and you find that you hear knocking, you get stones and other things thrown at people. You get weird vocalizations, and it's like, huh, people a lot of times don't see a Bigfoot. They just have these sort of after effects. And although those after effects could be put down to primate behavior,
Hmm.
there, without seeing the big, I don't know of anyone that necessarily has seen a Bigfoot throwing a stone at them. I'm not saying it's
Exactly.
not out there. It very well may have,
Yeah.
but I also think this phenomena tends to mimic things. Like with Bigfoot, I think there could be a real ape out there that we haven't discovered who may be smarter than us. Um, at the same time, I think there's this whatever it is that also mimics things. So there's a paranormal Bigfoot out there that's not the same thing as what other people are seeing. And sometimes maybe it just manifests as a poltergeist, or maybe people go into certain areas and it kicks in poltergeist activity and it's really coming from them. The same thing with EVPs. People go into a house and they're getting sometimes crystal clear EVPs. Um, but who's to say it's not coming from them subconsciously in the same way that poltergeist phenomena manifest? That they're not
Exactly.
imprinting on that recorder, that EVP, without knowing they're doing it. It doesn't. None of the problem with any of this stuff is it doesn't prove the thing that people are looking for. It doesn't prove that ghosts are real. It doesn't prove. People will sometimes say, do I believe in ghosts? And I'll say, well, I believe that people see something they classify as ghosts. I think those are real experiences with something that is not them, or is an extension of them to such a degree that they can't identify it as themselves.
Right.
That
Right.
doesn't mean I believe they're spirits of the dead, although they certainly could be. But without knowing, it's just an open question to me.
Right. Well, and that's what that kind of makes me think more on the idea if this is just not these kinds of experiences that we would call like maybe Bigfoot experiences or poltergeist or supernatural, if they're not just some kind of inherited part of our consciousness, right? Like the same way
Yeah,
that you can kind of look across ages and cultures and see recurring narrative in myth and legend. Like we carry these kinds of archetypal stories with us and these archetypal characters. If there's not some, if these kinds of paranormal experiences aren't coming from some similarly archetypal place in our consciousness,
yeah.
which I
Well,
think.
go
Sorry,
on.
no, no, go ahead.
Not only that, but I think what we're sometimes dealing with is we're encountering something we don't know how to process. I mean, when you look at this, when you look at the stuff on the table in front of you, it's not what it looks like because it is just vibrations of energy. Our brain translates stuff and creates these images for us and these sounds for us and everything else, but it's really all just vibration.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're out in the woods and you come across a vibration that your brain doesn't know what to do with, well, maybe that becomes Bigfoot.
Right.
And maybe that energy, like is just a wandering piece of consciousness that is not doesn't have a form, but now someone saw it and they put a form on it, not intentionally, but their brain had to camouflage it with something because it couldn't process it. And then someone else goes out there and they encounter the same wandering piece of consciousness and they're like, that must be the Bigfoot. And then the next thing you know, you have a Bigfoot walking around.
Right.
Um,
And then I guess, as these things are passed on, I mean, obviously this is part of the human condition, right? Because you can look back in history and see people trying to articulate or explain these kinds of supernatural experiences as far back as you can go, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everything from UFOs to Bigfoot goes back through recorded history. Ghosts, same thing.
Yeah.
There's, and like with UFOs, I feel like whatever's happening in abduction experiences is is trying to change us. Um, Jacques Vallée had called it a control factor at some point, I think in Dimensions. And I don't know if it's necessarily a control factor. Like the things that stand out to me are a lot of times people might see a UFO and then have a weird experience and they attach them together. Not necessarily because they fit together. It could be that something is happening with the Earth or cosmic rays hitting the Earth, and it creates sort of an Earth light. And so someone sees a weird light. And that energy also puts them in an altered state where they have access to this other, and then they just assume, oh, these others came from the light. And I think, again, with that type of stuff, there's a lot going on. But you look at the gray alien, which really didn't get popularized till Missing Time and Communion in the 80s. And you didn't see it as a constant prior to that. You saw it here and there. It became a constant when it entered the culture. When it entered it became a thing that, people actually knew. Then you got a lot of gray aliens. But you also have gray aliens in things like cave paintings. And Graham has done a great job in showing that most of these cave paintings were probably done by shamans who were probably on things like ayahuasca. You get grays when you take ayahuasca. So to me, that's a and it's possible we're dealing with an alien intelligence on another world that can somehow contact us. They may not even need ships to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I know it's always been kind of funny, that like our conception of aliens is very much like bordered by our own capabilities, right? Like, well, if they're coming, they must be coming in a mechanical ship that runs on fuel. Like,
where in reality they may just be sending their consciousness here.
Yeah, where in reality, I mean, the possibilities are so vast and so so much beyond our scope of imagination, even that it's almost funny to kind of try to box them in and like, well, they must be in a ship, and how did they get here?
Right. And that's fine speculation, because maybe it drives forward our technology a little bit as we try to think those things out.
Yeah.
But I think what's happening with this phenomena is it's not only trying to communicate, but it's trying to change us. Obviously people who do ayahuasca go through major changes. People who have near-death experiences go through major changes and have a lot of the similarities to people who have abduction encounters. And the thing that concerns me is the use of hypnosis in all of this. Because as I've learned more and more about this, hypnosis is not a good memory recovery tool. And it's very good at creating false memories, especially if you can't verify those memories.
Yeah.
And those memories often stick stronger than real memories. So if you have something that's going on that's happening on a deeper level of your consciousness, and like a shamanistic type awakening, like let's say these things are trying to push us in that direction, and then someone hypnotizes you and it turns into an alien abduction encounter, you may never get that shamanistic aspect of it again.
Yeah.
Because and it's not because the people doing it are trying to be harmful. I mean, they think they're trying to help.
Yeah.
But I worry that use of hypnosis is actually driving people away from the thing that this encounter is trying to create.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it does, and I think you saw that played out with the really famous was it Bud Hopkins? I think was the name of the.
Well, Bud had a little bit of controversy here and there. You might be thinking of David Jacobs and Emma.
Oh, okay, but the fellow who did a lot of work with regression therapy with people who thought they had abduction experiences, and it was later, his methods and results were really kind of undermined later on.
Yeah, well, Bud was in that category, definitely. Later on, his wife at the time had caught him sort of shifting data around a little bit. But David Jacobs entered a lot of controversy because he was really messing with this woman in Australia. And I don't think he was doing it maliciously.
Right.
But he was planting post-hypnotic suggestions to her like that she was schizophrenic. And things like that. And he did, I mean, she has come out very publicly. She has all the recordings of everything. And I look at, it's really hard to see David Jacobs in a good light when you look at all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's somebody who got very caught up in his beliefs. And I don't know that he was necessarily trying, being, like I said, I don't think he was necessarily being malicious. I think he just got lost in his own belief system.
Yeah. Well, and it's that kind of confirmation bias, I guess, right? That we
Yeah,
are talking
yeah.
about earlier. That's very easy to get kind of sucked into, especially when you're dealing with topics where, finding a kind of concrete um, answer is always going to be elusive.
And now you're seeing a slight shift from the extraterrestrial hypothesis over to like the interdimensional idea, which is fine. I mean, John Keel and Jacques Vallée came up with that back in the late '60s, independently in different ways. Um, and again, it's another possibility, but I feel like anytime we limit ourselves to one possibility, it it prevents us from seeing the whole picture. So
Right.
if you look at it like, okay, this is definitely interdimensional, well, now you're stuck. Now you're only going to look for the things that confirm it's interdimensional.
Yeah.
Um, and I would prefer to just kind of like not make any assumptions on what it is.
Right. So here's the $1 million question then, okay? So
Okay.
if you say in this hypothetical universe, if you could direct the paranormal research uh, directive for the next, say, decade, you're the one signing all the research grants for everyone who gets into this kind of subject matter. What would you most like to see it directed towards? Like, what
Well,
would you say is the place people should be looking to really start investigating this kind of phenomenon?
hmm. Well, research grants would be nice to begin with.
Yeah, just any research grant.
I mean, we've done tons of work on psi and actual research laboratories. That's been essentially proven,
Yeah.
despite what a lot of people seem to think. Um, I mean, there's a lot of clinical work on near-death experiences, but it's hard to put money behind like UFO research or stuff like that. I would think the key would be looking for these patterns. Um, Someone who could really try to look at it in the biggest picture possible and do a lot of taking down data and trying to find out where things connect. Like I was saying with the wilderness poltergeist idea,
Yeah.
um, you have these similarities, but so many of these groups don't talk to one another. The UFO people think the Bigfoot people are crazy, and the Bigfoot people think the ghost people are crazy, and the ghost
Yeah.
people think the UFO people are crazy. And it's just like, look,
Yeah.
you're dealing with similar things. You can ask someone like, okay, so there were a bunch of Bigfoot sightings at this time in this town. Did anything else happen? And then they either don't know, or sometimes they'll be reluctantly like, well, there were a couple UFO sightings. It's like, don't you think that's important?
Yeah.
That two weird things were showing up at the same time? It doesn't mean they're connected. It doesn't mean the Bigfoots were coming from the UFO, but it could mean that something was going on that allowed this stuff to manifest or appear to us. Maybe this stuff is always here and we can't always see it, but in that town at that time, something was happening that allowed us to see it.
Right. So
And
kind of a synthesis of the data basically is,
right,
yeah.
yeah, communication between the different people doing this stuff, and and not ridiculing each other, you know,
Yeah.
because I'm sure, and I don't think there's one answer. I don't think there's one thing going on. I think, like I said, there could very well be an ape in the woods as well as a paranormal answer to the Bigfoot mystery, something mimicking it, using it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we could be communicating with dead people, but at the same time, there could also be something else going on. Spontaneous PK from people doing investigations to something else pushing through that's not a dead person that's mimicking that. The trickster falls through all this stuff. If you read Hanson's book Trickster and the Paranormal, it's just eye opening. I mean, there's so much of the trickster just throughout all of it.
Yeah, that would be another really interesting angle to focus more on, almost from like a historical or almost kind of like a Joseph Campbell study,
Yeah,
looking at that role. That's I'll have a look at that book. Um,
it's not an easy book to read. I'll tell you that. It is a very thick book, and it's one of those things. I mean, I usually fly through books pretty easily. I started reading that, and there would be the chapters are very short, and I'd read like one chapter and be like, I got to put this down. I'll read more tomorrow. I got to process that.
Gotta chew on that for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, it's dense, and it kind of shifts the way you look at things. As
Well,
opposed to someone like Patrick Harper, who wrote, why can I never remember the name of his book? Yeah. Anyway, Patrick Harper's book is brilliant. It came out around 92. Give me 1 second while I run across the room.
yeah, no problem.
Demonic Reality. And I think Patrick Harper is one of those people who does not get much notice in this stuff. When I had him on, I think I had him on in the first year. He's supposed to be coming back on because he's written a couple fiction books based on some of his ideas. But we've been having trouble scheduling. And I read that book and I was just blown away. And he has come up with an explanation for the paranormal that is completely self-contained and explains pretty much everything.
Really?
It doesn't mean it's right, but it's really worth consideration because it's just brilliant. It's simply brilliant. And when I contacted him and asked, I figured there's no way he's going to do an interview. And I contacted him and he was like, I'd love to.
Oh, great.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I brought him on and I said, so how many interviews have you? You've probably done tons of interviews. He's like, I've never done any interviews.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, what? And he's like, nobody's ever asked. And I'm like, how? Like with all these shows of the paranormal, how has nobody ever asked you,
Right. Well, I guess, it's like you were saying, so many of those shows kind of thrive a bit on, the clickbait and the sensationalism and the shoehorning things into their own little boxes that, maybe that's not really what they're looking for. But it's too bad. I think that's the kind of thing that would actually draw more interest, and bring more legitimacy to that subject matter.
And I've talked to people who have said things, like I'll say, I've never seen you on Coast to Coast, and they'll say, oh, yeah, they contacted me, and I'll be like, oh, you didn't do it, and they're like, they wanted me to dumb my stuff down too much, and I'm not going to do that,
Yeah.
And it's not, that's how you get a wider audience, is you dumb the stuff down, and I don't want to do that. There's plenty of that out there already.
Yeah.
And for all the heat George Norrie gets for not being a good host, and I was kind of guilty of that at one point, being like, oh, he's terrible. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, if I had to do this 4 hours a night, 5 nights a week, I would be awful.
That's a lot. Oh, yeah, that's a lot of time to be, interviewing, sitting in the chair, listening. Like, people's attention span is only so long, even when you're a professional.
And even if you love the stuff, I think I would hate it by the time, a year in. I'd be like, I don't care about any of this anymore,
Yeah. You need a vacation.
So, it's like I have sympathy for George Norrie and what he has to deal with, because, and he handles phone calls so well, because he'll have good phone calls, and then he'll have the people where you're like, how did you derive a question from that?
Yeah. Yeah, he is definitely a consummate professional. He is very, very good with people of all kinds.
I'm happy to see, though, is a lot of podcasts not dumbing themselves down now.
Yeah, and on your channel, Where Did the Road Go? You feature some kind of companion podcasts that I think have their own sites as well.
Yeah, mainly right now it's Strange Familiars, which is Timothy Renner's project, and he was someone who contacted me, asked me if he could send me a book, and what is it called, Beyond the Seven Gates or something like that, and I was like, yeah, okay, go ahead, send it to me, and I wasn't really sure what to make of it. Then I got the book, and I'm thinking it's just going to be a bunch of sensationalistic, stories and stuff. Instead, he kind of went through and debunked a lot of the urban legends around the area, but then got into the the true stories of where some of this came from and true encounters that then spawned all the urban legends. And I was like, wow, this is great. Like, this book is really good.
Yeah.
And then I had him on, and I was like, okay, I really love this guy. Like, he had a great approach to the stuff, and he was really likable. And then he talked about wanting to do the podcast, and I said, no, I would love to because people always want more Where Did the Road Go? And I've been getting that since day one, and now I usually try to get at least 2 shows a week.
Yeah.
But I'm also worried about that burnout factor, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what I told people. It's never going to be a daily show because I wouldn't be able to keep up.
No.
You'd be hearing a lot of the same stuff. The quality of the show would drop significantly.
Yeah.
But putting Tim's show into the mix, it's a different type of a show. It is more folklore oriented. And it takes a very different approach than Where Did the Road Go? So I was like, yes, I would love to run this. But he has, his own thing. He has his own iTunes and all that, but people can also just get it through Where Did the Road Go? Steph Young was doing one as well, where she was just reading stories from her books. But she hasn't been able to do that in a while because she had some issues. And but I was running that as well, again, because it was completely different than what I was doing on Where Did the Road Go, but it still fit in nicely. It kind of dovetailed in there in a good way.
Yeah, they're both very complimentary, and the Strange Familiars, I thought they've done some great shows on folklore, like you said, and some really interesting stuff if people are really into Bigfoot as a kind
Yes.
of subject matter. And not just Bigfoot, but Little Feet, too.
Yes. And that's the other thing. Like, I don't do a lot with cryptids. I've had a bunch of, authors on who've written about cryptids, but I focus more on other stuff. Like, cryptids are not something that are a huge thing for me.
Right.
I find the really strange cryptids interesting. But I'm more after the high strangeness stuff than stuff like that. So having him do that is perfect. It kind of balances it all out because I think that's important too, and he's very into that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great pairing. So before we kind of wrap it up, we're almost at an hour and a half. I definitely wanted to ask you if there's any stories that you've heard over the years or that you've experienced yourself that kind of stand out as like really startling or the most intriguing, the most fascinating, the most head scratching. I would love to hear a kind of like a best of or a personal experience.
Well, I can give you a personal experience.
Okay.
Because that's easier for me than remembering other people's experiences.
Right.
So there's right off the bat, this just sets up for haunted location. There's a old psychiatric institution that's now a drug rehab prison.
Okay.
About 10 minutes away from me, and that place was supposed to be haunted. I never actually went in there. I know a bunch of people who have said they saw weird things there, but I also know people who worked there who saw nothing.
Right.
So, but they had a potter's field, and it was up on you would go down toward the lake. It's on Seneca Lake. You go down toward the lake, and you would climb this long driveway up into this potter's field, and it overlooked the lake. It had this cliff that was just a beautiful view. And so we used to hang out out there when I went down to see people down there when I was like a teenager and stuff.
Yeah.
And lots of weird stuff happened there. And one of the weirdest ones, we had actually sort of along the edge of the cliff, we had made little walkways and built benches on both sides. And so we could just go up there and hang out.
Yeah.
And we were up there one day, and there's 3 of us standing there. Our 4th friend was sitting at the other side, and we could see where he was. And we're sitting there, and the tree that's right next to us facing the field starts shaking. And we feel like the ground vibrating. And my first thought was there's a buck. There's a deer on the other side. It's a buck. It's pushing its horns into this tree, either in a threatening gesture or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, crap. Thinking we're going to have to drop down the cliff to get away from this thing, And so my one friend starts freaking out. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to, because we couldn't see through it. This was the thing. The foliage was so thick, we couldn't see through it. So I walked back down the trail. And as soon as I got to the point where I could see the other side, everything stopped. And there was nothing there.
Oh, weird.
And I was like, huh, all right. And my friend's going, what was it? And I'm like, nothing. There's nothing there. And I walked back and it started doing it again. And now he's really losing it. He's like, there's something there. He's freaking out. And I'm like, okay, all right. And I walk back down the trail, stops. I walk out to the other side of the tree. There's nothing in the field. It's not like something ran away. It's a big open area. I'm like, dude, there's nothing here. I walk back. I get back there. It starts doing it again. This is the point where our other friend asks us what we're talking about.
No way.
He wasn't seeing it. He was not seeing the tree move. He wasn't feeling the vibrations. And my other friend's just going, what the do you mean? What are we talking about? Now, the funny thing about memory with this, I had always, so the person who didn't see this happen was someone who experienced a lot of different stuff with me.
Okay.
The person who did see it never had another experience with me, and I don't think has ever had any of his own.
Really?
So when I remembered this, I swapped them, because in my memory, that just made more sense.
Yeah.
And then when I read my account of it, I went, really? Huh. Like, that's even weirder that he was the one that didn't see it. They, of course, both wanted to leave immediately because initially our one friend thought we were messing with him, but the degree to which our other friend was upset made him realize we weren't messing with him. We were seeing something he wasn't, and then they both wanted to leave.
Wow. That's definitely, like, poltergeisty.
Yeah, it's very poltergeisty, and it's like I walked away from that going, the most interesting thing about that is that he didn't see it. Like, this was happening right in front of him. It was a very physical thing, and and particularly being someone who experienced other stuff, it really blows my mind that he didn't see it. And I'm like, what does that mean? And what does that say about our perceptive ability? You know, 3 of us are standing there, this thing is happening, but only 2 of us are seeing it.
Yeah. That does raise some huge questions. And I mean, we already know that memory can be very tricky, you know, people can, so that's, like you were saying earlier, like we should encourage everyone to always write things down. It sounds corny, but keep a diary. It's important. But yeah, so that's fascinating. I wonder, and were there any more experiences, like anything else strange at that spot, or was that?
Oh yeah. I actually went back up there after we walked back down and they went home. I turned around and walked back up there by myself.
Yeah.
And everything was dead quiet. And there was something moving through the tops of the trees, knocking branches down, but I couldn't see anything.
Weird.
And there was just that weird Oz factor quietness, like a cone of quiet being over you.
Right.
And I just stood there for a while and eventually realized nothing else was going to happen, so I left.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely one of the weirder things that happened to me. I had someone say, well, maybe it was an invisible Bigfoot. And I'm like, well, I can't say it's not. You know?
I couldn't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I suppose an invisible Bigfoot could do exactly that. But again, you know, it's a possibility, sure.
Yeah.
In the realm of everything, it's as good of an explanation as anything else, but I don't have I never assign beliefs to these things, you know? Like, I just take what's there and be like, okay. One day I pulled into my driveway and almost like a tumbleweed of sparks started up on one side of the driveway, rolled across to the other side of the driveway, and went out.
Wow. That's unexpected.
Huh?
That's unexpected.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, that was weird. But, you know, I didn't try to, like, pin anything to it. The most recent thing that sticks out to me is I had walked in, this must have been last summer, as far as, like, real strange stuff. I was walking in from getting the mail, actually. I have a computer repair shop on my property.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the door to the computer repair shop open. And I know I was doing something with a Windows 10 computer in there. And as I'm walking toward the house with the mail, I hear what sounds like an electronic cuckoo noise. And it was fairly loud, and I stopped and went, what the hell was that? And then I thought, maybe it was computer. Maybe Windows 10 now put a cuckoo noise in. Who knows what they did with Windows 10, you know? And so I start walking toward the store to just see if there's something obvious that could have made the noise. And right in front of me, this thing moves that was basically invisible, but it was distorting everything. So it was like a bubble that moved in a very straight, steady line in front of me, distorting stuff on the other side, which is the only way I could see it.
Right.
And then disappeared into the tree next to my store. And I went, that was weird. And I walked over to the tree and I'm looking for it and there's just nothing there. And I'm like, okay. And then I went to the store and couldn't figure anything out. And, you know, and I'm looking at it going, were these two things connected? Like it kind of came from the direction that the cuckoo noise came from.
Wow.
But again, that doesn't prove it was connected, nor do I have any explanation for what it was other than weird.
That is weird, but you know what? That is that's really crazy to me because cuckoo noise aside, one of the strange little things that happened to me over my years, I was sitting in a restaurant with a close friend of mine back when we were much younger, and sitting at the restaurant booth across from each other, having coffee, chatting, and was looking at the tabletop, and I thought I saw a weird distortion move across the top of the table, like almost like in an old Windows screensaver where it takes the swirl,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly.
Kind of like what you described. And it happened very quickly, and it just kind of moved across, and my friend, I guess, noticed me looking at something strangely. And I don't remember exactly how the conversation played out because I mean this was like over 15 years ago, but
Right.
but she had seen the same distortion.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I must have said, oh, I saw something weird or it looked funny on the table, and she said, did it look like that? And I was like, yeah, that's what it was like. And she had seen the same thing, and it never it stayed with me, I guess, because it was odd, and it was something that we both apparently saw at least similarly enough that we could agree, it was mostly the same thing.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And
never.
there's no easy explanation in like a like mundane way to explain it.
Exactly, and it was never really like it wasn't troubling,
Yeah.
but it was just odd enough to stay in the back of your mind. So
I mean, my feeling was the cuckoo noise got my attention, and then this thing moved in front of me for whatever reason. Because I wouldn't have been walking that way if I hadn't heard the cuckoo noise.
right, yeah, it kind of like it was almost like it drew you to it.
Yeah, but and the people were like, well, maybe it was a hummingbird. I'm like, huh. What do hummingbirds look like when they're on like a straight flight, And so I looked up videos of hummingbirds, and of course, most videos of hummingbirds are them flipping around flowers, and I'm like, yes, I've seen this,
Yeah.
And finally, I found some videos of like hummingbirds actually flying a distance, and was like, yeah, that's nothing like what I saw.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's just those weird little out of place things that you can't really understand or put a finger on that just make you wonder, just keep you wondering.
And that might be what all this is about, is keep pushing us forward, keep making us wonder, that there's something out there out of reach.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of things on the horizon though, is there anything up and coming on Where Did the Road Go in the near future that people should know about and look forward to?
I don't book that far in advance, to be totally honest with you.
Okay.
I used to book 6 weeks in advance when I was doing a live show. But now it's kind of like I have a pile of books here that are really interesting. I just got one today, actually, from Gary Latchman, who I'm planning on having. I actually contacted Gary the first year I was on because I really wanted to have him on. And he totally agreed to come on, but just get back to him in a month, and I never did it.
Oh, no.
So I've always been like, now I feel bad because he's going to remember.
Aw.
But Yeah, they sent me his new book, and they're like, "We want to have him on your show," and I'm like, "Great! I really
Excellent.
want to talk to Gary Latchman." He's actually the ex-bass player to Blondie, but he's done a lot of writing on Jung, on consciousness. This new one is on magic and the age of Trump.
Oh, that sounds. Oh, I definitely have to hear that. I'm
So
sold. That sounds
yeah, so
fascinating.
it's all the stuff going on behind, like sort of behind the scenes, I think, in
Yeah,
politics that have to do with occult type stuff.
there's on that topic, if that's something, or maybe this might be something you might want to bring up to him. There's a great video by a guy named Jonathan Pajot, who's Canadian like icon carver, but he also does a lot of work in symbolism. Who did a great video on the metaphysics of Pepe. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so that definitely I think seems to fit into that topic, but that's a bit getting off topic too. Um,
Other than that, I have oh, what's his name? Xavier. Hopefully, supposed to be talking to him tomorrow. Xavier Hayes, who's written a book on ancient giants. That's out on Inner Traditions, and that's I'm actually going to finish reading that tonight. I'm supposed to talk to him tomorrow night. So I don't know when this is going to air, so it may already be up by the time this
yeah,
airs.
yeah.
Assuming that goes okay. Um,
Knock on wood.
yeah, I got Laird Scranton coming back on his new book on the Maori culture in New Zealand. I got Karen Crisis coming on at some point when she gets back from Italy to talk about her Witches of Italy book.
Cool. So
Yeah, I don't.
lots of good book reviews and authors coming up then.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll be doing some roundtables. I have a bunch of news stories I want to cover in our Fringe News show. It's just a matter of coordinating with everyone. A bunch of my roundtable people wanted to do it last Friday, and I was like, "But I'm going to a concert."
Oh, yeah, scheduling conflict.
And I don't
Concert.
go to a lot of concerts. I'm generally pretty burned out on going to things like that. But I got talked into it, and I'm like, "Of course, this is the week everyone wants to do a show." And I'm like, "I'm free this Friday," and everyone's like, "Oh no, we can't this
No.
Friday." And I'm like, "Of course not."
All right. Well, I can't recommend your channel strongly enough, Soraya. I've really enjoyed it over the last couple years, and like I said, for anyone who's interested in paranormal topics, should definitely check it out because you're going to get a lot of thoughtful content without the clickbait and without
Yeah.
the outrage, just for the sake of
If you go to
outrage.
wheretotheroadgo.com, there's not even ads or anything on the page. It's just content. Every show we've done is on that page. Usually, when I'm on other shows like this, a lot of that stuff is up there. Although I'm a little behind putting some of those up. And if you're interested in metal, especially underground music, you can check out The Last Exit for the Lost at thelastexit.org
Awesome. And that airs after Where Did the Road Go on
on WVBR. Yeah.
okay.
So if people want to listen live, they can do that on Saturday nights. I'm literally on the radio from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m.
That's a marathon.
Yes, and I've been doing it for 24 years.
Well, congratulations. You're coming up on what is that, the silver anniversary?
I have no idea.
Some kind
And
of milestone.
and when I say that, I've also because I do radio. Just if you have one more moment,
Oh, of course.
the difference I've found, like with these type of podcasts, people generally do them regularly. With the fictional podcasts, not so much. They'll do them in seasons and things like that, which is understandable. But I've literally done Where Did the Road Go every single week, sometimes more than 2 or 3 shows a week since I started. I've never missed a week. There's never been a break in it. And the same with The Last Exit for the Lost. I think literally there have been three nights that The Last Exit did not air since I started doing it 24 years ago.
That is a very impressive record.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud of it.
Absolutely. You should be.
I mean, and the times that it didn't air were either problems with the station where nothing was broadcasting, or literally we were so snowed in that nobody could make it to the station.
Yeah, that'll happen up in this our neck of the woods.
It doesn't happen often, but there were a couple of times where even the people who lived a few minutes away from the station were like, "I can't get there."
Yeah. Yeah, no, I remember one winter where literally I worked maybe a 5-minute drive from home, and there was a day where it was just not happening.
But I think being on radio it puts me in that mindset of I have to have something on every week. You know, there's no off weeks.
Yeah.
I don't rerun stuff. It's always new stuff every week.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for providing some awesome content, and thank you very much for taking the time to sit down at the kitchen table with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoy it, Seriah. Thanks. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Sure, anytime.
All right. Cheers.